Okay, Ji. Okay, now this is the idea. Now we said that aggregate demand is made up of these 5 components, and we need to know that what factors change aggregate demand. And to know what factors change aggregate demand, we need to know what each of these components is made up of. I repeat, to know how aggregate demand changes, right, we need to know what factors change these components. Does it make sense? Right? So अगर हमने ये पता लगाना है कि aggregate demand change हो रही है consumption की वजह से, then obviously it brings the question that what factors affect consumption, and similarly what factors affect investment, what factors affect government spending, and so on and so forth, right? So to understand the changes in aggregate demand, which is a major factor determining the GDP of a country, we will understand that what each of these components of aggregate demand is made up of. Does it make sense? Exactly, right? So then if you remember, we talked about consumption function, right? Now, what exactly is consumption function? Let's recap. So it is a mathematical equation, it's a mathematical equation that explains or identifies factors on which an individual's consumption depend on. I repeat, consumption function, an equation that predicts or that identifies factors on which consumers' consumption depend on. An equation which identifies, right, as you were just saying me, right, telling me that it is interest rate, income, and a lot of other factors that affect consumers' income. So all of these factors will be part of your consumption function. Okay, think about this. Consumption function is what? An equation which identifies, right, factors on which consumers' income depend. On which, just a second, consumers' income depend, right? Sorry about that. On which consumers' income depend. Okay, now this being said, right, preferences of consumers and so on and so forth. Very good, excellent, that's correct. Okay, now let's look at the consumption function. Okay, now we said that these are all the factors. You have correctly identified all of these factors, right? So let me rename these, right? So far you have told me that factors that affect consumption of an individual includes income. If incomes are increasing, then obviously we will expect the consumption to increase, and that's true. Another factor that affects consumption of an individual includes income tax. Then it is the general price level. Then other factors can be important, like preferences of consumers, inflation rate, blah 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 blah, right? Okay, so there's a long list, and interest rates, right? So these are all the factors that affect consumption of an individual, right? But then we said that we will divide all these factors in 2 categories. We'll divide all the factors that affect consumption in 2 categories so that we can differentiate between autonomous consumption and induced consumption. So what we're doing over here is we are dividing the consumption in 2 components, right? Autonomous consumption and induced consumption, right? So students, what we're doing right now, think about this. So today we are doing a little recap of what we did in the last class, which was within Keynesian cross, we talked about consumption function, and then we talked about saving function. So we are doing a quick recap. After that, we'll move on to the next concept, right, today. Okay, now stay with me. Autonomous consumption and induced consumption. So what I was saying over here, that there are a lot of different factors that affect individuals' consumption, some of which we have already listed on top, which includes income, which includes right, income tax, which includes interest rate, and so on and so forth. There's a long list, right? We classify all these factors in 2 categories: one, induced consumption, and one, autonomous consumption. Anything exactly. So induced consumption, think about this. Induced consumption is the component of consumption that is dependent on consumers' income. I repeat myself. So induced consumption is the component of consumption that is based or dependent on consumers' income. Let's write this down. Component of consumption based on consumers' income. Consumption, just a second. Autonomous consists of other factors apart from income. That's absolutely correct. Very good. Component of consumption based on consumer income, and right, in this case autonomous consumption would be component of consumption that is based on other factors, anything apart from income. So anything apart from income, right? When we'll move forward and talk more about it, when you look at the consumption function, then you will be better able to understand that what we mean by autonomous and induced. Component of consumption that depends on or based on consumption that is dependent on other factors apart from income. That is dependent on other factors apart from income. How many of you are absolutely clear on this? Apart from income. So these are the two major categories within consumption. Okay, now moving on. Very good. So students, long story short, let's look at this one more time, because if this is clear, everything will be super clear, right? So we said that we are looking at right now what we're doing. So Keynesian cross is a big model, and within that big model, there are a lot of small concepts that we need to understand. So whatever we are doing from today till we complete the Keynesian cross is part of Keynesian cross, right? So what is Keynesian cross? Keynesian cross is a model that is used to predict aggregate demand, right? So Zed, you might be feeling a little lost, but here I am filling you in. So Keynesian cross is a model that predicts aggregate demand of, that predicts GDP of a country. It's a complete big model, right? And to understand that thing, we have to do different smaller topics and concepts before we build Keynesian cross, right? Easy, simple. Are we clear on this? Now, what we are discussing over here is that aggregate demand, which is the total demand for all goods and services in an economy, that is made up of 5 components. You would know from AS: consumption, investment, government spending, exports, and imports. Now, what we will do here is that we will talk about consumption function, which is basically what? Consumption function is an equation that identifies the factors that affect consumption. I repeat, consumption function is an equation that we are about to see in a bit that identifies factors on which consumption of an individual depends. As we have already discussed over here, income is a major factor affecting income. Income tax is consumption. Yeah, income is a major factor affecting consumption. Income tax is a major factor affecting consumption. Interest rates, and so on and so forth, right? Okay, now to divide all these factors that affect consumption of an individual, right? So we have divided these in 2 categories. One is known as induced consumption, that is dependent on consumers' income. This is what you need to remember. So induced consumption is anything that is dependent on consumers' income. Are you getting me? And autonomous consumption is anything that is dependent on factors apart from income. Anything dependent on factors apart from income. Is everything clear so far? Which vaccine did you take? So, okay, so I took Sinovac because I went there and at that time, so for my first dose, I did not have, I did not know which one to get and so on and so forth. And they do not even give you the choice. So when I got my message, I went there and they were applying Sinovac, which is Chinese vaccine, you would know. And when you get the first dose of any vaccination, you have to take the second dose of the same one. So you can't do like first one is Sinovac and the second one is Sinopharm. I mean, people are saying a lot of different things. I mean, I know from a fact that one of my friends, like my friend in USA, he told me that Pfizer, which is an American brand, तो उन्होंने जब उसकी vaccination लगवाई तो वो हो गया. There was some problem, some complication with some people. But Sinovac is Chinese. Sinopharm is also Chinese. But I don't know. It should be good. It should be good. Sinovac is okay. Yeah. I mean, thank God I did not had any complications after that, and I have not heard anyone who had problem with that. Even my mother got it, and some elderly people, my father and so on, but they are alhamdulillah fine. So I think it should be good. But when you go there, when you get the message, you go there, I don't think so they'll give you the choice, whatever is available. And Sinovac, the one that I'm talking about, that is available in more abundance. So majority of people in Pakistan are getting Sinovac. Yeah, but even if they apply anything else, right? So just get one. Did you check with Cambridge, by the way? Did you check with British Council if you need to get vaccinated before you take the exam or what? Just give me a second. Let me clear the screen. Okay, so, but it's good definitely to get yourself vaccinated. Okay, got it today and feeling good. Right. Yeah, fever. Some people are getting it, but older age people. So, and I mean, it's never a rule of thumb, but even young people can get fever. So the good thing, like one precaution that you can take is as soon as you get the vaccination, so you soon after that take a Panadol, which is basically temperature controlling medicine. You don't know, right? So वो होता है लोग कहते हैं, तो I think that works. But that's great. Okay, so students, let's get started here. So we said that consumption function is an equation that we're just about to look right now that identifies what factors consumption of an individual is based on. Now listen to this very carefully. Now, the way we will write the consumption function that I'm about to show you, and then I'll also show you a graph for that, is that this is the total consumption. C is the total consumption, right, for an individual. Now, C naught, I'll explain you what C naught is. Plus, right before this, let's talk about something else that's also important, right? So when you earn any income, whatever income someone is earning, so that's divided in two categories. The income that someone earns, that's divided in two categories. That includes, consumption. So whatever income I earn, either I spend that or I save that. Yes or no? As simple as that. So this is something that we already know, but we have never looked at it in a mathematical form. So that might be something new for you, right? But this is very obvious and simple. Think about it. What are the two possibilities? How can I spend my income? All right. Either I will spend it on buying goods and services that I need, or it will be lying in my bank account, or I might invest it. But obviously all of that is technically part of savings, right? Okay. Now, this being said, another thing that you need to know is that for different people, they have different preferences for spending and different preferences for savings, right? So some people, you must have heard, आप लोग दोस्तों को भी कहते होंगे, right? You're a miser, or you save a lot, and you don't spend a lot, and so on, right? So what that basically means that different people have different preferences for their money, right? Some spend a bigger proportion of their income, some save a bigger proportion of their income, and so on and so forth, right? So the next thing that we're about to discuss is a new term which you have to understand: marginal propensity to save. Now, what does marginal propensity to save means? Marginal propensity to save is a calculation that calculates what proportion of your additional income you save. Marginal propensity to save is a calculation that tells us what proportion of your additional income you save, right? And the way we calculate this is change delta saving over delta income, right? So delta means change. You already know this, right? We know this. So change in savings due to change in income is your marginal propensity to save. How many of you got me over here, right? Now, one simple example and everything will be crystal clear, that if out of 100 additional rupees, I spend 50 and I save 50, this means that my marginal propensity to save is 0.5. If out of 100 additional rupees that I earn, I spend 50 rupees and I save 50, so this means that my marginal propensity to save is 0.5. Change in saving depending on change in income. Very good, Elishpa. Absolutely correct. Okay. Now, similarly, another thing that you need to calculate is your marginal propensity to consume. So that is completely opposite of saving. Marginal propensity to consume would be change in marginal propensity to consume would be change in consumption divided by change in income. So when your incomes are increasing, how much of that additional income you will consume, that is your marginal propensity to consume. So change in consumption in the numerator divided by change in income. Are you getting me? Is everything clear on this? Change in income. right? Okay, now one thing that you need to know, as I've already mentioned this, that either you can consume your income or you can save your income. There's no other way around that, right? So this means that your marginal propensity to consume plus your marginal propensity to save has to be equal to 1. How many of you got this over here? Right? So think about this. I mean, this should make sense. This is quite intuitive. Think about this. So if there are only two possibilities of how you can spend your income, either you can consume it, buy goods and services that you need, or you can save it, right? There's nothing else you can do with your money, right? So similarly, your marginal propensity to save is showing you the proportion of income that you consume. Sorry, marginal propensity to save shows you the proportion of income that you save. So if 50% is your saving of all the additional income that you earn, then automatically it means that 50% would be 50% of the additional income that you earn is consumed. How many of you are getting me over here, right? This should be simple and easy, right? So, right? Similarly, if I change the values a little bit so that you get a better idea. So if 80% is your marginal propensity to save, this means that 80% of your additional income you save, then it means that what will be your marginal propensity to consume? So 20% will be your marginal propensity to consume, which means that 20% of your additional income will be consumed, right? 0.2, very good, excellent, we got this. Okay, now let's keep moving. Now this is something that is always true, this is something that is always true, right? Because it's an equation. Okay, now this being said, let's move on. Okay, now we're about to look at consumption function. Now consumption function is, just a second. Okay, so think about this, students. So your consumption function would look like this. Have a look at this. C is equals to C naught plus MPC times Y, right? So this is your full consumption function. Now let's break this down. You weren't here, Rishba was already here, so she knows, but let me tell you what this means. Above, okay, have a look at this. What I was talking about autonomous consumption previously, this is your autonomous consumption. Now think about this. This means what? That this is not dependent on Y. C not a constant. I mean, this might sound a little mathematical, but obviously this is involving math, so that's why I'm explaining you in that terms. Think about it. C naught is lying constant. It's a constant, right? It's not being multiplied with Y. It's not being multiplied with any variable, right? So autonomous means that anything, first of all, autonomous consumption means that this is not dependent on income. That's why this is not being multiplied by Y. This is not being multiplied by Y. Like it's happening over here. Like it's happening over here, right? So this is your, let me choose a different color. So this one is your autonomous consumption component, and this one is your induced consumption component. Let me write this down. So this one is your induced consumption, and this one is your autonomous consumption. This one is your autonomous consumption. Now let me elaborate on this. Right. So think about this. The thing is, C naught has to be paid whether you use earning income or not, right? So C naught has to be paid whether you're earning income or not. Autonomous consumption. Absolutely, that's correct. Excellent. Rishma. Okay, think about this. Above, have a look at this. Now the thing is, even if this is 0, think about it. Assume that Y is 0. ये देखें, इसके अंदर मैं वैल्यूज थोड़ी सब्स्टिट्यूट करके बताता हूँ. C नॉट कांस्टेंट है, तो C नॉट लेट्स से आपका 5000 है, राइट? C नॉट 5000 है, इसकी कैलकुलेशन भी हमें आनी चाहिए, राइट? MPC को 0.5 कर लेते हैं. MPC 0.5 का क्या मतलब होगा? स्टूडेंट्स, व्हाट डज MPC 0.5 मींस? Quickly. Arbab, what does MPC 5.5 means? This means that you are spending 50% of your income. This means that you are spending 50% of your income. Does it make sense? Right? Now, I have rewritten that equation. I've rewritten that consumption function that is written on the left, right? Exactly. Just the difference in this equation, just the difference in equation 1 and equation 2 is that in equation 1, I've substituted the values. So this is the difference between equation 1 and equation 2. Got it? So C naught is 5000. Now, what does this mean? Right? Okay. Now, it means that even if I take Y to be 0, if Y is 0, again, Y को मैं 0 substitute करूँ, right? If I assume Y to be 0, which means my income is 0. Y क्या यहाँ पे represent कर रहे हैं? Y income है ना? my income that I earn per month, right? So even if I earn zero income, which can be possible if I'm unemployed and out of work, then what happens is why income? Sorry, I was taking it very obvious that you would know. In economics, we refer to income why, right? Got it? Easy. You good on this? Okay, now let's keep going. Okay, now if I am not earning anything, my income is zero, right? So so if I substitute a value of zero over here, so anything multiplied by zero is zero. So this entire term becomes zero. So then my consumption turns out to be 5,000. Now, what is this showing me? This shows that even if I'm out of work, I have to consume 5,000 rupees, which means I'm spending this money on some product like food item or something of the sort. So yesterday I gave an example that, think about this. You are not earning anything at the moment, but are you not consuming anything? Is there no expense on you, right? Your parents are paying for all the expenses that you're making, right? Starting off with food, starting off with, education and so on and so forth, right? Which happens for every, child in the world, right? So think about this. Even if your income is zero, now I'm about to make a graph because that is easier to understand. Have a look at this. So income is on the x-axis, income of an individual is on the x-axis. That can be in rupees, dollars, whatever you want to think about. And consumption is on the y-axis. Consumption is on the y-axis, which is how much money you're spending on different goods and services. Now, the way it works is, right, so even if your income is zero, your consumption cannot be zero. You have to spend some money on buying the basic goods and necessities that you need in life, right? So that will start with 5,000, which means that your consumption function will be an upward sloping line like this. Why would be an upward sloping line? It will be an upward sloping line because it means that higher your income later on. Again, 5,000 तो आपने spend करना ही करना है. You have to spend 5,000, like, which could include your basic food expense at home, your living expenses. No, living expenses are, they are joint, so that doesn't really count. But the special expenses that your parents are making on your food, on your education and stuff like that. So even at the moment, you're not earning anything, but this is the basic expense consumption that you're making, right? But then what happens, and this is true for me as well. So if any period in time I'm unemployed, I have to spend this much money on buying the basic things, right? Then as my income increase, so if I move right on the x-axis, which means my income is increasing, I move up the y-axis. Which means my consumption would start to increase. How many of you got me over here? Is this simple? Arbab, did you get this? Right? Now, this is exactly what the consumption function is showing. This component of consumption, as I said, is dependent on your income of the individual. So that would be induced. And this component is fixed. So this is fixed. This is a constant, right? So it depends on other factors. This can depend on other factors like interest rate. This can depend on other factors, blah, blah, blah. But this is autonomous, which means it doesn't depend on your income levels. Got it? Easy? Are we good? Can we move on? Okay. Now this being said, we'll move on and we'll talk about, very good, saving function. Right? We'll talk about saving function. Autonomous consumption is spending on luxurious goods. नहीं. देखिए, मैं आपको बता दूं, Alishma. So think about this. When someone is not earning anything, that can be on luxury goods, but you can think of this as the basic amount that someone needs to survive, right? Are you getting? So think about this. If I'm out of work, think about this. If I'm out of work, I don't have any income, I'm not earning anything. So ideally, as a normal, rational human being, I would want to spend as much I can, because then obviously I will run out of my savings and I don't want that. Basic necessities, exactly, right? ठीक है. अच्छा, ये आपका था consumption function. उसकी हमने वो भी देख लिया, एक दफा दोबारा देख लें इसकी equation. So the total consumption of an individual is based on two components of consumption. One is autonomous consumption, that is based on anything but income. So that's fixed. C naught is a fixed number. And then MPC, which is your marginal propensity to consume that we just looked at, times Y, which is the income of that individual, right? Now, the very simple way how you can calculate consumption, let me give you a quick idea on how the calculation is done, and then we'll move forward from here. So think about this. Just a second. So if someone is earning, if this is the equation for me, or let's say for someone else, right, whoever. So I need two values to calculate my total consumption, right? Think about this. So what is my total consumption during a certain month? If my C naught is 5,000, or let's say 25,000, because Pakistani rupees, 25,000 is the basic amount that I need to spend every month, and my marginal potential to consume is, let's say, 0.5, which means I spend half of my income and I save half of my income, right? Times Y. Now, if I know the value of Y, I can calculate the total consumption that I will make in that month, right? So simple example of that would be, let's say 50,000 is my income, and this is 0.5. So multiplied by 0.5 plus 25,000. So you can calculate it for yourself that my total consumption that month would be 50,000 based on the calculation that I just did. Yes or no? Is it making sense? Is this clear? 50K. Very good. Excellent, right? So ये आपका consumption function है. Now we are about to look at saving function. Saving function, just like consumption function, would show what factors someone's saving depend on. What factors someone's saving depends on. One important and very primary factor a factor that determines your savings is your income. Just like consumption, right? देखिए अभी हमने देखा ना कि the total income that someone earns can either be saved or consumed, right? There's no other way around that, right? So all the income that someone earns would either be saved or consumed, right? Are we good on this? So we are about to look at the saving function now. So saving function would be, have a look at this, 0 S naught, right? Negative S naught. Now what is S naught? I'll tell you in a second. Plus MPS, which is marginal potential to save into Y, which is marginal potential to save into Y. Now have a look at this, students. So the total saving of an individual would be made up of two components. What would that be made up of? Your autonomous saving. What is your autonomous saving, right? And what is your, this one is what? This one is your induced saving. This one is your induced saving, right? So autonomous saving and induced saving. So why am I saying this, that this is induced? Because this is dependent on your income. This is dependent on consumer's income, that how much income that person earns. Are you getting me or not? Right? At zero income, well spent rather than save, we will use our saved income when our income is greater than autonomous saving. Just a second. At zero income, we'll spend rather than save. Exactly. We'll use a saved income when our income is zero, autonomous saving. Yeah, that's correct. Okay. So as Alishba said, Arbab, have a look at this. Now what happens? I said when your income was zero, you were still consuming C naught. When your income was zero, we just saw in the consumption function that you were spending C naught. Where is that money coming from? So think about this. If I'm not earning anything and I still need money for food, I still need money for, basic expenses. So either I will borrow it from someone, right? But in this case, we're assuming that I'm self-sufficient. So what I will do, that if I've saved some money over the years, which I have, which most of the people do, right? They'll use their savings to pay for their expenses. Yes or no? This is what it means, right? So right now I'll draw this on a graph and things will become more clear to you, right? But this is what you need to remember for now, right? So this negative S naught, and why is this negative? Because the savings are not positive. Saving positive होने का क्या मतलब है कि I'm saving some money. So whatever I earn, I save something, put something aside. But in this case, I'm not saving anything, right? Right? Can you see my screen? So in this case, I am using my previous savings. So this is dis savings. What do we call that? This is dis savings. And why I need to do dis savings? Because right now my income might be zero and I'm not earning anything. So to pay for my expenses, I have to use my previous year savings. Okay. Now let's look at the saving function. Saving function को अब हम देखने लगे हैं, students. So please pay attention. Okay. Now, what how would your saving function look like, right? So think about this, right? Right. Yes, Arbab, just give me a minute. ये अभी जब मैं आपको बना के दिखाऊंगा ना, so everything will be more clear now. ये देखें, अभी अब तक हमने देखा है आपका consumption function. ये देखें, let's do it like this. So your consumption function was like this: income on the x-axis of the graph and consumption on the y-axis of the graph. Consumption on the y-axis. Okay, now I said even if your income is zero, you can't survive, right? You have to spend by some basic necessities, right? Food and so on and so forth. So even when your income is zero, let's say the bare minimum that you need to survive in Pakistan is 25,000 rupees or 20,000 rupees, whatever it is, to buy food and so on and so forth, right? But later, when your income increase, your consumption will also increase because now you are earning money, so you can spend that money. As simple as that. So ये आपकी shape थी consumption function की, right? Now, great. Now looking at the saving function, ये देखें, Arbab, so when you're not earning anything, ये देखें, ये जो 25,000 है जो आप spend कर रहे हैं जब आपकी income zero है, ये कहाँ से आ रहा है? ये आपकी negative 25,000 savings हैं, right? So people, think about this. Big mature people, when they got unemployed in COVID, what did they do? They stopped eating food. They stopped paying rent for their, they stopped paying their electricity expense. Electricity expense government ने waive off किया था COVID में, नहीं किया ना, right? Did government waive off your rent? Right? Rent was not. So all these expenses were already there for all these people, right? But now since they're not earning anything, so where did they pay this money from? So they paid this money from the previous year's savings that they had lying in the bank account or whatever, right? So this is where your saving function will start from. And then it will go up. The more you earn over time, the more the savings you make, right? The more you earn over time, the more the savings you make. So this purple line is your saving function, right? And the other orange line was your consumption function, right? This is your consumption function. How many of you got this? How many of you are clear on this? Right? Is it making sense? Right? So let's look at the equation one more time. The total consumption of an individual is made up of C naught, which is autonomous consumption, plus marginal propensity to consume times its income. And your saving function would be negative S naught, which is your dis savings, plus marginal propensity to save times Y. Right? Arbab, is there any confusion? Please ask me again. Saving function always negative. Starts with the negative. Arbab, it starts with the negative, but then it goes up. So it starts with the negative because of the fact that we just discussed that if your income is zero and you have to consume the basic necessities, then this means that you are using your previous year's savings to pay for that expenses, right? Yes or no? So इसलिए मैंने amount भी same लिखी है. So this was your autonomous consumption, and where are you financing it from? So you're financing it from your dis savings over here. That's why this starts with the negative 25. But then what happens? As your income increases, you can consume more, and as your income increases, you can also save more. So both lines are upward sloping. At zero, income function is negative. At zero, income, saving function is negative. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So what Elishma said, that when your income is zero, which means that this is the point, your savings are zero. Because think about this, if we substitute zero over here, तो ये जो पूरी टर्म है ये आपकी जीरो हो जाएगी. अगर y जीरो है, किसी भी चीज को जीरो से मल्टीप्लाई करें तो क्या आता है? जीरो आता है. ये पूरी टर्म जीरो हो जाएगी. तो इसका मतलब ये है कि आपका सेविंग जो है वो स्टार्ट होगी किस पॉइंट से? इस पॉइंट से. Arwam, is this still confusing? Or is this clear now? Right? So this is what is savings functions become positive. Exactly. देखिए है ये हमेशा पॉजिटिव. देखिए अब it depends, मैं आपको बताता हूँ. ये देखें. So relationship, have a look at this. So the relationship between income and saving is positive. I got your question. So the relationship between income and savings is positive, which means higher the income, higher the savings. But its starting point is negative. Its starting point is negative, right? ठीक है जी? So it's, ये देखें, अगर मैं आपको सिंपल सी एग्जांपल दूं, ये देखें, चलें, अभी मैं आपको एग्जांपल देता हूं. I quickly thought of a good example, right? ये देखें, let's say this is 50% benchmark, right? ये exactly negative नहीं बनेगा, लेकिन चले मैं आपको थोड़ा सा example देता हूँ. ये let's say ये pass है, ये pass criteria, right? So you have pass on 50% on an exam, right? Then above this you have 60, you have 70, then you have 80, and then you have 90, right? Is everyone clear on this? And on the x-axis, so this is your grade. This is the percentage of marks that you get in your final exam, right? ठीक है जी? ये let's say इसके ऊपर आपका E आता है, जो bare minimum pass होता है, Cambridge का जो भी है. And on the x-axis, you have the time that you spend for that, right? So if someone has spent a very little time, right? I think if this is a, I think this can sound good. So if someone has not spent any time studying at all, so that person will start from here. So if you did not spend any time, so your time studied was 0, right? You did not attend any class, you were bunking, or not you meaning someone else, right? So that student was bunking, never went to class, and blah, blah, blah. So obviously that student would expect you, right? Slowly he increases his study time. So he increases his study time. Even with this study time, he fails because that was too less. So if you just study 2 hours before the Cambridge exams, how many of you think you can pass the exams? Or let's say 5 hours. Even if you spend just 5 hours the night before your exam, and before that you have not studied anything. So what do you think? How do students get you? Because they've not studied anything, right? Or 5 hours or 6 hours. That's not good enough. So the bare minimum that you need to pass, let's say Cambridge exams, right? That would be 50 hours of study, right? So that would be 50 hours of study. And that would be just enough to pass. But as you keep studying more, students who get A stars, distinctions, and so on, and A's, right? So they're spending more time in studies. That's how it goes. So it's a direct relationship. Arbaz, does it make sense now? Right? So there's a direct relationship between the time spent studying by the student and the grade that they get. But it starts off with the negative. Why? It starts off with the negative because if you've not spent any time studying, obviously you get, less than the basic marks that you need to pass the exam, right? So higher the income, higher the savings, but higher the income, higher the savings, but it starts off with a negative sign, your dis savings, because it means that when your income will be 0, you will not be saving money. Instead, you will be using your savings, right? Is it making sense? Is it clear, or is it still confusing? Just a second, let me get rid of this. Okay, great, perfect, right? So always remember that when you're not earning anything, so you can't expect to save. You're just spending your money, right? Right? So that's the thing. Okay, so let's move on. Now we have discussed consumption function one last time and then move forward, because after that everything is super easy. After this we have already completed the basic part of that, right? So your consumption function goes like this. Consumption function means that this is your autonomous consumption, which is C0, which is the basic income that you need to spend to stay alive, right? Your food expense and so on and so forth, right? But what if your income is 0? Obviously, right? So this point says that your income is 0, right? Which means that you're not working or you are out of work and stuff like that. Now, to pay for this expense, you have to utilize your previous year's savings, right? Previous year's savings, whatever you've saved. So if I go on a leave, I say that, oh, let's take a break, right? I've worked for good 6 or 7 years, right? Let's go on a break, right? I don't want to work the next year. Okay, fine, that's cool. But who will pay for my expenses? If my parents don't sponsor me, or no one else sponsors me, right? Then I will be utilizing 25,000 every month to pay for my basic food, to pay for my car fuel, to pay for my clothes, to pay for the basic expenses that I have to make. But gradually, let's say when my incomes start becoming positive when my income is increasing. When my income is increasing, I start going to that thing, right? That's what it means. Okay. Remember the equations for the two. So consumption is made up of autonomous consumption, which is C naught, which means that it doesn't depend on income, times plus marginal propensity to consume into Y. So this is your consumption function, and your saving function is negative because it starts with the negative Y intercept, and then it is positive marginal propensity to save times Y, right? So these are the two equations that you need to remember. Easy, we good? Okay, now we'll move on. So as I said, we have completed the most important part over here. Now everything moving from here onwards is easy, right? So hopefully we'll complete up with this in today's class. So it should not take us more than 15 maximum minutes. Okay, so students, have a look at this. Now, I said we'll break down the aggregate demand components into different functions. So we'll talk about consumption function. We have also already talked about saving function, which is not part of aggregate demand, but that was important to understand how consumption function, why the consumption function looks like the way it does, right? Okay, now aggregate demand, we said we'll break each component of aggregate demand 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 into what? Into their function. So we have already discussed consumption function. Now we are moving to investment function. Then we'll talk about government spending function, then we'll talk about export function, and then talk about import function, right? Okay, now the next thing on the agenda is investment function. Now you tell me what factors investment of an economy is based on. What are all the factors that are considered by producers and firms to determine how much to invest, right? Okay, so right. So interest rate, definitely one. So if interest rates are high, if interest rates are high, then you will invest less because cost of borrowing is more, right? Demand for the goods and services, very good, Arba. Demand, inflation. So these are all the factors that would affect investment. But here is the good thing. Here's the good thing. So listen to this. So I asked you that what are the factors on which investment of an economy depend on? And you're very right that investment of an economy would depend on a lot of different factors, which can include interest rates, which include, aggregate demand, like how much is the overall demand for goods and services in the economy. That can depend on inflation. That can depend on so on and so forth, government incentives and so on and so forth, right? But we will assume in this model, profit is another very important thing, income is another very important thing. Very good, Lishma. So in this model, we are assuming, investment is a function. Your notation MSc, you don't need to remember. मैं सिर्फ आपको ये दिखाना चाह रहा हूँ कि investment is dependent on interest rates, aggregate demand, inflation, and some other factors, right? That we don't know or we haven't listed. But the good thing is that in this model, we will assume that this is your investment function, right? इसमें हम assume कर रहे हैं कि your investment is not dependent on your income. It's just the autonomous investment. Change in inflation depends on change in income. Change in investment depends on change in income. Alishba, exactly. Now think about this. Now this is where it gets interesting. आप मुझे ये कह रही हैं कि GDP affects income is what, right? The overall